couple of years. Let's talk about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Coming up a little bit later, we'll talk about where Utah's defense ranks amongst the other defenses in the Pac-12. But first, I want to start with conference realignment talk because that's been all the rage. And in order to do that, we got to bring on our leading expert when it comes to Pac-12 conference realignment talk, the host of Locked On Pac-12, Spencer McLaughlin. And Spencer, this week especially, I've been talking about some realignment stuff because there's some noise around Colorado going on out there right now, what they may do going forward. And all these Utah fans, a lot of them seem to think that Utah is going to get left behind in whatever the next phase of college football looks like, and they'll be forced to go back to the Mountain West, which is ridiculous. And I covered that earlier. But anyways, it just seems like everyone's worried about being left behind. But what I think I go back to is I don't know why everyone is worried about being left behind when there hasn't been any moves made yet. It's not like Oregon and Washington are in the Big Ten. In fact, if they had an invitation, I think they would already be there. So I expect them to be there for the next few seasons. And the same thing with the Arizona schools. And even on the off chance, I don't think Colorado's going to go. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that more in a second. But even on the off chance they did, I expect the Arizona schools to stay. San Diego State's on the way. Like, I just feel like in the short term, the Pac-12 is in a good position. And it's not like the Big 12 is like running circles around them as it's kind of being perceived. I don't see the advantage to Utah for going to the Big 12 right now.
Well, the reason you have that perception about the Big 12 running circles around the Pac-12 is because the Big 12 has a media deal and the Pac-12 doesn't. But once the Pac-12 is able to actually finalize its deal and get it rolled out, and we're starting to get into crunch time on that, by the way, with that June 30th deadline really for San Diego State and maybe SMU being added looming now. We're less than a month away from that particular day. I think that's, the urgency of that matter is ratcheting up. But then once that deal gets done, which we all expect it to, and people reporting within the industry expect it to, and the presidents expect it to, then it's not going to feel that way. It's not going to feel like, even if the Big 12 comes in, a couple $1 million ahead of the Pac-12, it's a negligible amount of money. It's not going to be, unless the Pac-12 deal is like $2 million per school. Like, okay, then we have a sizable gap. But if the Pac-12 comes in at 28 and the Big 12 is at 31.6, like that's not, it's something, but it's not radically shifting the ground in college athletics for those particular leagues. You have to get, I think, into the $10 million range difference between this conference and that conference to really make a sizable impact. Because you have to remember, money that comes from those media rights deals, it doesn't go to the football program. It goes to the athletic department. The athletic department has a lot of expenses. They have to cover everybody's travel, everybody's scholarships, everybody's coach's salary, not just football. So that's why you have to get, I think, kind of into the $8 to $10 million range to where you'd say, a team getting that amount is able to pony up more money for a coach or an assistant to retain him rather than, getting poached from somebody else who can offer more money in that sense. But it's all moot for us lower three Power 5 conferences, Pac-12, Big 12, ACC, because the Big 10 and the SEC have got so much more than everybody else now. It's the haves and the have-nots, and they're certainly the haves. And, with regards to the worry of Utah getting left behind, I can't see that happening with the football brand that they've established, the television product that they have become. Their upper half of the Pac-12 in terms of a TV rating from a season ago. They were basically tied. They were like a little bit ahead of Washington, but basically the same as the Huskies, who everyone sees as a valuable commodity there. And Salt Lake City, I think, is a growing media market in that sense. Of course, rumors of a Major League Baseball expansion team. So no, I wouldn't be worried about it one way or the other if you're a Utes fan. And I certainly wouldn't be worried about the conference, being on the brink of extinction here because Colorado is about to jump ship. Because as we're about to discuss, I don't find that to be particularly likely.
Yeah,
But
let's start with
interesting for sure.
yeah, let's start with the Buffs because we could talk about the other teams too. As I mentioned, I don't feel like there's an offer for Oregon and Washington to be in the Big Ten because they would be there. I
No.
think it's pretty clear and easy. We know that the two best positions in college football right now are to be the SEC and the Big Ten. So if you could go there, you'd go there. And I don't see that they're going to like just randomly tomorrow open up that membership to them. So I do think that's off in the future if it does come eventually. As we've mentioned before, the Pac-12 schools have said they're united in the past, but the one kind of lingering one now seems to be Colorado. Just after their AD, who I think you made a point recently, Spencer, just talk about how you at least appreciated the honesty in his answer because it is just kind of like, hey, we want to be in the Pac-12, but we also know we have to do what's best for us, which is exactly the right mindset that every athletic director should have. So I still think it is best for Colorado to stay in the Pac-12 right now. As we've talked about before, media rights deal is going to come up. It's going to make things closer. I don't see the advantage of making that lateral move anyways. And just changing conferences, it just usually takes time to, even in a more lateral move like this, it just takes time to get to the top when you're facing all these new opponents, new travel, all those kind of things. Like I just don't see why the Buffs would want to move right now.
No, and they don't have to be in any sort of hurry if, they really are considering the Big 12, which by the way, I get a kick out of this stuff in like a major, major way. So Rick George, the first thing he said was, you can only believe about a third of what you hear out there. I've seen several reports, quote unquote, for those listening on podcast, of Colorado is about to announce that they're going to the Big 12. And then and those were not true, by the way.
No, yeah.
And then once there was an announcement of a Board of Regents meeting, Colorado was in the news again. Oh, they're gonna do it. Oh yeah, here they go. Like these people just get crazy into this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Conference alignment was not on the agenda, according to James Crepey of the Oregonian, an actual credible on the ground real reporter who you should try and listen to. Those sorts of people, not other sorts of people who tell you, yeah, I'm hearing this is going to happen from random weird online sources that don't actually exist.
The trust, where's your sources? Trust me, bro. Those are my favorite.
Trust me. I'm hearing it. Like, okay. Trust me. Florida and Alabama are about to come to the Pac-12. Trust me, man. This is about to happen. But so I did think it was an honest comment from Rick George because he said, look, we want to be in the Pac-12. Of course they should want to. There are a lot of considerations as to why they left the Big 12 for a reason, right? You don't leave somewhere if you have a long-term desire to be there. So the whole idea that Colorado wants to be in the Big 12, absolutely ridiculous on its face. They've never wanted to be in the Big 12, but he is leaving the door cracked open there for a doomsday scenario. I think that's what he's doing. And I think that's a very fair thing to do. I don't think it's, giving credence to false reports or rumors or speculation or anything to say, yeah, we want to be in the Pac-12 and everything works out well. We're going to be in the Pac-12 and this is where we would like to be. But also, we have to figure out what's best for the University of Colorado here because you don't know, right? So think about the Boston Celtics the other day. The Celtics were on the cusp of doing something that nobody had ever done before. The Cleveland Cavaliers once upon a time did something that nobody had ever done before. So it's unlikely that those sorts of things happen, right? The Red Sox coming back from down 3-0 against the Yankees way back when in 2004. Okay. Some things are, they haven't been seen before. And so it's easy to say, well, that never happens. Some things never happen until they happen, right? There's a first time for everything. Everything happened for the first time. So I think being prepared in a world that is constantly evolving, that is constantly changing, that is unpredictable, that is wild, crazy, and all this sort of stuff, I think leaving the door just like ever so slightly ajar while not wanting to go out there and bust it open, I think leaving it open and saying, okay, yeah, if the worst were to come to pass, we're going to be prepared for that. You put together, if you live in the Midwest, a shelter plan, right? I lived in Oklahoma for a year and a half, and I had to learn about tornado drills. I never had to do that before. A tornado never actually ripped through the city or the town where I was living, but we were still prepared for it because of course you should be. Because it's not completely ridiculous. It was highly unlikely.
Yeah.
But was it technically possible? Yes. So if something is technically possible, where you could see a realistic world in which this happens and you have to be ready for this, you got to be prepared for it. I think that's what he's saying. And I think that's a fair place to be. But the idea, if you see anything that says Colorado is about to jump to the Big 12, they're making it very clear. We don't want to go there. We want to be in the Pac-12. We're waiting for the media deal. And they did not talk about conference alignment at their Board of Regents meeting, at least per James Crepea, the Oregonian. I'm going to trust him more than random online internet sources.
Yeah, 1,000% agree. A lot of great stuff there from you. And just in general, I mean, I feel like the likelihood of Colorado going somewhere in the next 2 to 3 years, of Washington and Oregon going somewhere, I mean, it's easily less than 5%, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think Oregon, Washington leaving would be more realistic than Colorado. That doesn't mean that it's very realistic, because it is not, right? The reason I say that is because the Big Ten could offer Oregon and Washington at any point in time and they would leave. At any moment, both would leave for kind of different reasons, but I don't think there'd be any hesitation from those schools who reportedly have reached out to the Big Ten before and have been turned away because it's not something the Big Ten presidents are interested in doing further at this time. But if they ever change their mind, if they ever want more schools to pair with USC and UCLA, yeah, they can do it. They could absolutely do it. Whereas Colorado doesn't want to go to another conference. They want to stay in the Pac-12. And that's the biggest differentiating factor there.
Absolutely is great stuff, as I said. And we're going to come back in a second and talk a little bit more about the Pac 12 conference. But as it relates to the stuff that we love talking about more than conference media stuff, in the on the field product, we're going to talk about where Utah's defense will rank amongst Pac 12 defenses this coming season. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get up a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Guys, FanDuel is awesome. You get great promotions every day. It's safe, secure app, and you get paid on your winnings instantly. And how great have the NBA playoffs been? It's been a crazy run for the Miami Heat. The Denver Nuggets landing here now to Spencer. I'm going to go with the Nuggets in 5. What do you kind of feel?
I have the same prediction. I think the Heat are a little worn. Now, it's hard to say that because the Heat are the team that continue to prove us wrong over and over and over again. But the Nuggets are playing really good basketball, and the Celtics are just not. Like, I think the Celtics were discombobulated. They were a little out of sorts. They might be blowing it up. I mean, right after the game, Jaylen Brown isn't sure about his future. I'm going with the Nuggets there, and I will take them in a competitive 5. But I think it's the Nuggets' time.
Doesn't it feel like we're heading for another Jimmy Butler meme, just like where he's leaned over on the side of something like exhausted?
Oh yeah, we're setting ourselves up for it. But bet whichever way you like.
Yeah, so make sure you guys head over to FanDuel. Once again, there's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Spencer, coming back into this one, as we said, Utah, when you're looking at their defense, has been really strong over the past few seasons, and trying to rank amongst the other defenses in the Pac-12. Before we even dive into that, Adam Brenneman published an ESPN ranking that they had their top 10 defenses going into next season, and they had Utah at number 8 overall. They were the only defense ranked in the top 10, and that would therefore give them the top defense in the Pac-12, according to that ESPN ranking. And I do think that's fair when you're talking about having 8 of 11 starters back, numerous other key contributors, the young guys coming in, and obviously exceptional coaching. I do believe this Utah team will have the best defense in the Pac-12.
You've got some other good teams to go up against. I think the wild card in determining who's going to have the best defense here in the Pac-12 this season are the Oregon schools, or the wild cards, I guess, are the Oregon schools for different reasons. Oregon State had either the first or second best defense in the Pac-12 a season ago. They've brought in some players on the defensive line to bolster what was easily their weakest unit, but they have lost players, Jaden Grant and Alex Austin, out of the secondary, which was easily their strongest unit. So that sort of balance, unclear how that's going to play out, but they returned their defensive coordinator, Trent Bray, who's absolutely brilliant and did a marvelous job with them a season ago, and took them from an offensively driven team the season prior when they went 7-5 and made them into a defensively oriented team, and they went 10-3. So, and they were 7-6 the year before. But anyway, 7-5 in the regular season. So I think that's the question for Oregon State, is that's one of the teams you're thinking about. Well, could they have the best defense in the Pac-12? Certainly that's a major question, is how can they handle, right? You're at Oregon State. You're not recruiting the blue blood, blue chip prospects in the country, right? So what is the depth of talent there? Do they have guys who can come in and play like Alex Austin and Jaden Grant did a season ago? They also lose Omar Spates to LSU via the transfer portal and, NIL, frankly. So how do they handle and recuperate from those losses remains to be seen. But then they bring in a 4-star edge in Kelsey Howard that figures to be a solid player on the defensive line, a couple other new pieces there as well. Oregon is a question mark because their defense really struggled in select moments a season ago. They were still a top 5 defense in the Pac-12, which is, not saying a ton when you only have 12 teams, but they were still top half of the conference in yards per game allowed and points per game allowed. Now, both need to improve, but you wonder about with year 2 under Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy, and you bring in Chris Hampton as well from Tulane, a team that, won the American and the Cotton Bowl this year as your co-defensive coordinator. You combine a couple of returning experienced coaches on the defensive side of the ball. Lanning's still young, but, he's a DC for several years at Georgia, with Chris Hampton from Tulane, and then the new personnel that they've brought in. They lose Christian Gonzalez. They lose Noah Sewell. Key losses in the defense. But the secondary, you got some questions there, but a lot of new players. But the defensive line is the biggest thing. They were historically bad getting after the passer last year. And they bring in Jordan Birch, former 5-star recruit out of high school from South Carolina, and they bring in Mateo Uyunglele, who until literally the very end of the recruiting process was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school as well, and in the spring game very much looked the part. So I wonder with those two defenses whether or not Oregon State takes a step back and whether Oregon can take a step forward. Because if you're talking about total composite talent on your defense, Oregon's probably tops in the conference, but they would have been near the top of the conference in that department last year as well. And it did not click the way that many Oregon fans, myself included, were hoping it would. But you have some key returners. It's year 2. You tend to see growth when a team is well coached and you have returning players and they bring in guys who they feel like can fit their scheme. They get Popo Amavai back on the defensive line as well. He was a first-team All-Pac-12 guy in 2021. Not sure what you have there coming off the injury, but those factors I think can all play into where Utah's defense will stack up, because I think those are probably the other teams that you're looking at. And then I would look at Washington too, but really I would lean towards Washington State. Now, Washington's got, between those two schools, the 2 best individual defensive players in Zion Tupuola-Fatui and Braylon Trice, especially Trice, who's an absolute beast.
He is.
But Washington's defense last year, much like Oregon's, had some good moments, had good sequences, did not put together a full season. They allowed 39 points to Arizona on their home field in Seattle. They allowed 45 points to Arizona State. Like, they won games primarily with a shootout, though they did play better against Texas in the Alamo Bowl. So I think with the returning production, guys that they've brought in via the transfer portal to kind of bolster that defense, players returning from injury as well for Washington, that'd be a team to watch. But I don't expect them to be there. But Washington State, you lose Dayan Henley, which stinks because he's a great player off to the NFL. But you bring back Ron Stone Jr., who is a cornerstone defensive piece at the edge position.
Phenomenal name too.
Absolutely. Absolutely top tier name. And you just look at what Jake Dickert has done. He's completely shifted Washington State's identity into a defensively oriented team. And they've been good. They've been well coached. They're ferocious. They're tenacious. They play kind of havoc defense. They're flying around, going a million miles an hour all the time. So those are the teams that I'd say would be in contention to have the best overall defense. I think Washington State could have the best scheme defense, but I don't know if they'll have the personnel to match it, especially with the weapons and quarterbacks that you've got in the Pac-12. But I think, Utah has to be up there with the way they can not just bring in talent now, but develop it with Kyle Whittingham, the way that they're coached, the system they run. He knows what he's doing, been doing it for almost 2 decades now there in Salt Lake City. So I feel like that's kind of your biggest competition. Is I would put Oregon and Oregon State first, but then I wouldn't sleep on Washington State either. And, everybody else, if you want to
really quick, it is amazing. Like, cause all the teams you just mentioned, like Utah, Oregon State is like the fringe contender, right? Even a Washington, I'll get a shot. USC is the one a lot of people still think, and for good reason, Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley, like they're going to be the team to beat in the Pac-12 this coming season. And this is the thing. They might have the defense they have to overcome once again, right? Like how much better do you think they will be in year 2 under Alex Grinch now that they have maybe a year more to get some of your guys in? But I usually think it takes a little bit longer than that, especially like usually year 3 is when we see kind of those defenses, especially when we talk about development come into play. So where do you kind of expect the Trojans defense to fit in this whole thing?
I mean, they could be middle of the conference, but I mean, Alex Grinch is there. I'm never going to expect them to be great defensively. Like
Why wouldn't they haven't been? You're
if
expecting something that's never happened then.
exactly. Insanity's doing the same thing, expecting a different result. If you have Alex Grinch as your defensive coordinator, don't tell me you can't recruit players to Oklahoma. Oklahoma can recruit at top 5, 10 level in the country.
They're doing it
Can
right
they
now with the
Yeah,
defensive
exactly.
talent they are.
Can they recruit better players at USC overall? Yes, of course they can. Your ceiling is higher, but it's not so much of a gap where I'm thinking, well, what Oklahoma was missing was the ability to recruit. Like, no, it's just not a part of Lincoln Riley coach teams' cultures. It's just not, and it never has been. It doesn't need to be, by the way. His system clearly works immeasurably well because he's had 10 plus win seasons every single year that he's been a head coach, which is pretty remarkable.
Unbelievable.
And they brought in a couple quality transfers in Bear Alexander from Georgia, Anthony Lucas from Texas A&M, former big-time high school recruits. Okay, that bolsters their defensive line. Great. You still have a whole other group of players that you have to coach and that you have to scheme for. And we've seen Grinch do it. So I expect USC's defense to be better. I don't expect them to be good, but that's the thing. They don't need them to be good.
No.
That's not something that you look at and say, wow, USC needs to have a, top 2 or 3 defense in the Pac-12. If they do that, they are a lock for the college football playoff.
Yes.
An absolute.
Yes, they
like
are.
if you told me right now, USC has got a top 30 defense in the country, I'm like, national championship. End of discussion. So I feel like that's where USC is at. An interesting team in here to think about is Cal.
Okay.
I don't know if they could have. I don't think they can.
You like Cal?
I don't. I am a de facto Cal fan.
Yeah.
Like we don't have Locked On Cal Bears, but like that's basically what I am now. Locked On Pac-12.
Yeah.
I'm the biggest. I've got to be the biggest Cal fan of a non-Cal specific affiliated show or writer or podcaster or whoever talking about the Bears. But Cal every year has got a solid defense. They can't bring in the sort of talent that I think like Washington State. I don't think they're going to bring in the sort of talent to where they could be the best defense in the conference, but will they have a good one? They usually do. Like their defense was pretty bad last year by Cal standards. Colorado would have taken that defense in a heartbeat.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's just going to be interesting to see kind of what level the Buffs are at this coming season with all the transfers and crazy stuff going on with Dion. But Spencer, before we get out of here, I am curious to ask you, what is your biggest question when it does come to this Utah defense? You kind of laid out your questions for all the other teams, but I am curious, what's your biggest question with this Utah defense?
Right, I think it's how you replace Clark Phillips because a guy like that can just take away a top target, a side of the field, big on third down. If you're a quarterback sitting back there in the pocket and you are reading the defense saying, I want to go here with the ball, but you look over and you see number 1 covering whichever receiver is out there, and you have to look elsewhere, that completely changes the psyche and just overall effectiveness of your ability to distribute the ball in that situation. So I think replacing a guy as dominant as that is a really, really hard thing to do. And it changes also how you call a defense, because if you have a guy like that, I can put Clark on an island.
Yeah.
No, I can sit him out there. That's fine, right? You can always do that, and it gives you a lot of advantages. I can shift, coverage over to the other side to help because I can put Clark one-on-one. And the worst thing that's going to happen is a guy makes a contested catch and then is tackled immediately, right? Because I know Clark isn't going to go over there and get burned for a 35, 40-yard gain. That's a really big help to a defensive coordinator. And I think Coach Scally and Coach Witt have got, some real figuring out to do on that front with regards to how do we call a defense without a guy like that? Or do we have a guy that we feel is 70 to 80% the player that Clark was? So sometimes we feel confident in his ability to do that. I think that's the number one question for the Utah defense, because Front seven, look, as a relative outsider to Utah, I feel confident in their ability to be physical, to be tough, and to just be really solid, especially against the run. So I'd say that's kind of the biggest outstanding question for the Utes right now, defensively.
I agree. I think when you look at losing a guy like Clark Phillips, it has to be the question. I do think the team has taken the steps to try and answer that. You had a guy in Miles Battle with a lot of SEC playing experience, so he's going to come in. But I don't think they expect Miles Battle to be their Clark replacement. I think if you had, and I like that what you mentioned, not a direct replacement, but that 70 to 80%. I think that is what they believe is Amaya Vaughn, who was on this team last year, actually led the team in passes deflected overall, just because Clark wasn't targeted as much. And that's what we saw Clark do back in 2021, was lead the team in passes deflected before he had an outstanding season, his third season with the team, where he had 6 interceptions overall. I don't think Vaughn will have that level, but I do think he can be a quality number 1 corner on the outside. You get JT Broughton back too. So between Vaughn, Broughton, your 2 and 3 corners from last year, try to replace them with Phillips. You get battling a couple of young recruits as well. That's where it's going to be very interesting to see. I do feel good about Utah's ability to replace Clark in a sense of like, will they be okay there? But it's definitely something that's going to be fun and interesting to watch. And just to put a bow on this defensive discussion in general, when you're looking at last year's statistics, kind of those teams you mentioned, those 5 teams you were really looking at, and even Cal was 6 in this stat category. When you're looking at points allowed per game, Oregon State only allowed 20, Utah 21.4, Washington State 22.9, Washington 25.8, and then Oregon 27.4 overall. And then in terms of yards allowed, Utah was first at 222. Oregon State was second in 224. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see how that translates. A lot of those teams that we mentioned there do return a lot of guys and are looking to add some of those new pieces too. So it's going to be fun to see how it all plays out once we get to Pac-12 play getting underway in September.
Less than 100 days,
yes.
JT.
Yes, we are.
Less than 100 days. We're just counting it down. I'm trying to get like into that full summer vibe. You know, time flies when you're having fun. I'm trying to have as much fun as possible so that I can just like blur through it all, wake up one day and be like, all right, we got football on the TV, baby.
It's going to be a lot of fun, even when it starts with Colorado plays the same night that Utah does. And Utah plays Florida on the 31st. Doesn't Colorado play that night too? Or are they the Saturday before? They might be the Saturday before.
Well, let's double check. This shouldn't be that hard to figure out. September 2nd is when Colorado plays at TCU.
Yes. Don't they play Nebraska?
Yeah, they play Nebraska at home on the 9th.
Oh, September. Okay, so I was off.
Yeah, so they're playing.
Oh, you know who plays early is I think USC plays week 0 against San Jose, right?
You might be right about that. Let's see.
Trying to salvage my credit.
Yep, August 26th against San Jose State.
Good deal. There we go. But Spencer, appreciate you joining us as always.
Yeah, anytime, JT. Thanks for having me on.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes, but we'll be back on tomorrow's show discussing recruiting. We'll see you then.